the 19th episode of the WWJ Industry Connected Podcast, a monthly podcast devoted to the groundwater industry produced by the National Groundwater Association. I'm your host, Mike Price, and today we're joined by Jim McDonald of Starr Hydro Incorporated. We discuss the history and importance of hydrofracturing, guidelines for it, career highlights, and more. And welcome to the podcast, Jim McDonald of Starr Hydro Incorporated in Sterling, Massachusetts. Jim is a pioneer in the world of hydrofracturing water wells and sells hydrofracturing units and associated equipment under Inflatable Packers International. He's a retired certified well driller from NGWA and once chaired the association's hydraulic fracturing committee in the early 2000s. Much more can be said on Jim's illustrious career, but that's it for now. Welcome to the podcast, Jim. Thanks for your time.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
You bet.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the importance of hydrofracturing wells and the basics of it for consolidated bedrock formations, bedrock wells, for viewers who aren't familiar with the process or the equipment. Can you give us the history of it and where things stand today?
The hydrofracturing actually started in the oil field and crossed over to the water well industry in the early 1980s. Maybe as late as the late 70s, but it really started to take off in the early 80s. We use the same type of equipment as the oil field does, naturally on a much smaller scale. We end up with the same end results, which is increased yield in a borehole, in any borehole. And of course, in oil and gas, it's minerals, and then in water, we're looking for more water. But besides being able to increase the flow to the particular well, the fact that you're opening fractures also creates a larger borehole drainage area, which is something else you look for. So you're actually creating even more storage around the borehole. So you get increased volume, plus now you have more storage. So you're able to pump more water for a longer period of time. I think most of the industry started with new wells that were not producing enough to supply a home. So with more and more regulations, especially through Board of Health, you're limited to a well envelope, a smaller and smaller space to be able to drill. So instead of being able to pick and choose one corner of the lot or another corner of the lot, you're limited to where you can drill. So you may only be able to put one or two tries, and naturally well drillers are looking for something to increase the chance of getting water in just a few chances they had. Mm-hmm. So hydrofracturing started then, and it worked out well from almost from the beginning.
What's the typical well yield you generally see in a residential application?
I think most places are looking for somewhere around 5 gallons a minute. Supplies most households. I know almost every state has a different way to test a well, or different regulations. In Massachusetts, we need 5 gallons a minute for 4-hour test. That doesn't mean it's a 5 gallon a minute well. You may have a 600-foot well with 300 gallons, with 3 gallons a minute, with a static of 40 feet. So if you start a test after 24 hours, you can effectively pump 5 gallons a minute for 4 hours. Some states need an 8-hour, 5 gallon a minute test. It just depends on what they are. But I think for the average home, they'll look for somewhere around 5 gallons a minute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the cost effectiveness of hydrofracturing versus a new well, it certainly is cost prohibitive for the well owner to consider hydrofracturing. What's your upsell, your talk with customers over the years?
Well, for us, most of our customers were well drillers. We worked for well drillers, pump installers, people in the industry. For them, I'm sure that they were telling their customers that instead of continuing to drill more wells or drill deeper, traditionally in your area, if we drill to 600 feet, if we don't have water by then, we're usually not going to get it. So, we can hydrofrac. We'll know the results. In one day, we'll know if it worked, and it's quite a bit cost effective, way less cost than drilling a new well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the equipment's cheaper to buy.
Right. And speaking of equipment and the process itself, You were telling me off air, things have been redefined over the years. Can you bring us up to speed on today's process and equipment for hydrofracturing that has been
Right.
changed since the outset of it?
Yeah, the original units that were built were most of the time were just an engine and a pump, oil field pump, usually triplex, plunger pump, and they'd couple that to an engine with belts and pulleys, a clutch to engage and disengage, and that was about it. You would throw the clutch in, and would start pumping water. The engine would bog down. You might give it a little more throttle. From there, we went to I think the next progression was a transmission. So we have a engine transmission direct coupled to a pump. That gave us quite a bit more control where you could use first gear in the engine in the transmission. So you weren't trying to really run the engine really hard to try and build the pressure. And then as the pressure dropped off, you could shift gears into second gear. That way you could speed the pump up, get more volume. So in hydrofracturing, it's kind of a two-step process. The first part of the process is to build pressure in the well. And you do that by sealing the well off with a packer. The well should be full of water up to the packer, and then you introduce water into the borehole below the packer. So, as everyone knows, fluid doesn't compress. So, it takes very little volume to build a great amount of pressure. So, if you're building pressure in a well, most of the time it's maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and the pressure will increase as you're introducing this volume into the well. The pressure will increase. Once you reach the maximum pressure for that particular borehole, a fracture is going to open and allow the volume you're pumping in to go through that fracture. Once that happens, the pressure starts to decrease. Then you want to get to the second part of the process, which is to introduce more and more volume into that well, into that fracture. So as you increase the volume, you're opening the fracture further and further away from the borehole. So once the fracture opens, once the pressure builds up and starts to drop off, then you get to the second part of the process, which is you want to continue to flood the hole with more and more volume. As the fracture gets larger, it's going to take more volume. So you need to run the pump faster to get more volume into that fracture. So you want to open the fracture further and further away from the borehole. The further away you can open it means bigger fracture means it holds more water. You can also get the water that's in the area to transmit to that particular borehole instead of just staying around in the aquifer. So again, the increase in yield plus the increase in drainage area allows quite a bit more volume.
And you're filling, it's potable or disinfected water that you're using, the pressurized water you're pumping down.
Yeah, yes, yeah. We would always advocate that you should be using potable water. You don't put anything into a well that wouldn't come out of the well. Even in plate fluid that we use an FDA approved non-toxic antifreeze. Anything that you use, like even your pipe dope nowadays should be environmental pipe dope. So anything you want to introduce should be potable.
And the water you're using to fill the well, that is part of the pressurized water as well.
Right, exactly. If the well's not full, you want to fill it up to at least where you're going to set the first packer.
Okay.
Some of the guidelines we have are we normally don't like to hydrofrac wells that are closer than 100 feet to a well on an adjoining property. If they're on your same property and you communicate from one well to another, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you can increase both wells at the same time, but we try not to influence somebody else as well. We also want to we say we'd like to set the packer the first time 20 feet below the bottom of your casing or 60 feet, whichever is deeper. Um, as you know, when you're drilling into bedrock, the first 10 feet of bedrock is usually weathered. It's usually kind of fractured. So if you drill 10 feet into bedrock, you seal your casing 10 feet into bedrock. If you go 20 feet below that, you've got almost no chance now of communicating to the surface. So the top of bedrock could be very weathered. Usually the fracture gradient runs closer to vertical than horizontal. So there is a chance for the fluid to come out around the packer and up the borehole somewhere on either side. So those guidelines that we made years past still work today. We're still using the same guidelines today. So eliminating communication from one well to another or to the surface. You can use a single packer to get multiple fractures to open in a well, where if you set your packer the first time at 60 feet, lithostatic pressure, ground weight, it's not very much, 1.2 psi per foot of hole. So most of the time you're going to open a fracture closer to the surface than you are deeper in the well. So when you're pressurizing the well, you're pressurizing the entire borehole at one time. It's feeling the same pressure at 500 feet that it does at 100 feet. So when your fracture opens, you want to finish your process and then deflate your packer. You can do a second set by trying to get that packer below the first set that you opened. So you've eliminated that. Your pressure will probably build more for the second set than it did for the first set. And you can do this 2, 3, 4 times in a well, going down with a single packer.
Mm-hmm.
We do find now that quite a few well drillers are going to a straddle assembly, which is 2 packers with perforated pipe between them. So you can actually isolate individual zones. If you camera log, e-log a well, sonic log, however you do it, you can actually pick fractures that you think are going to be better candidates for hydrofracturing. Most of that would be if you're looking for a very large increase. So typically golf courses, industrial applications, restaurants, condominium projects, things like that, they would be looking to get the maximum yield out of any well. Now, zone fracturing does take quite a bit longer, so it does cost more. So for the average household, usually a single packer works. But for dual packers, you can set the packers as many times as you want, 8, 10, 12, 15 times. Every time that you set those packers, you have a chance to get more water to come into the borehole. So any one of those zones may not give you a huge increase, but most of them may give you some. So when you add it up, you get a very, very large increase.
Mm-hmm.
So we do find that we do sell quite a bit of equipment for zone isolation fracturing or straddle packing than we used to.
Let's go down memory lane with your career. You started off in the oil field and then transitioned into the water well drilling market, creating hydrofracturing units under the Starr Hydro Incorporated. And you offered services for water well contractors for hydrofracturing. Let's hear about your career.
I actually started drilling irrigation wells in the Midwest. Wells for like center pivot irrigation systems, big systems like that. They were mostly reverse circulation, running Jet A and Jet B hole masters, porta drills, 600-800 feet. These were 1,000-gallon-minute wells. That's where I first started drilling, and then from there, I transitioned from there to the oil field.
Okay.
We're talking a long time ago. I almost think it was that long ago, but in the oil fields where I first saw hydrofracturing. That helped later on when I went back to the water well industry from the oil industry. I had a partner at the time who was looking to develop something in the hydrofracturing industry, and we used a lot of what I knew from the oil field to make what we needed for the water well industry. So it was kind of a twofold. I knew what we needed to do. He knew what we needed to make to do that. So it worked out well.
What were you doing in the oil field?
Drill oil wells, gas wells,
Mm-hmm.
tool pushing for a while, ran two or three rigs, overseer of 2 or 3 rigs. Most of my time was in the Midwest, in Wyoming and Montana, South Dakota, Colorado. The last oil work that I did was in Texas, East Texas. And then this would be in the 80s when oil boom started to slow down. So I went back to the water well industry then.
Okay.
That's when we started. And it was then around in the early 80s, 83, 80, we started a service company and a manufacturing company. The service company was first started to test the manufacturing company's equipment. It actually worked out very well because the service company got to be almost as large as a manufacturing company. At times, we were running as many as 6 rigs at one time, strictly doing hydrofracturing. We didn't do any pump work. We didn't drill wells. All we did was hydrofracturing. We would ship rigs all over the country. We had rigs running in California. We'd ship to the Gulf Coast, working in Canada, just from here in Sterling in Massachusetts.
And on the service side, you drilled for 45 plus years for contractors in your area in your region, correct?
For hydrofracturing, yeah, we started hydrofracturing in '84, and I sold my last rigs with the service company in about 2 years ago. I think coming up on 3 years. Actually, you had a piece in Waterwell Journal where I sold to Danny Boyd of DNA
Yeah,
Water Service.
right. Glad to hear he's continuing on your legacy there.
Right. Yeah, Danny's doing very well.
Can you share any favorite jobs, any hydrofracturing jobs in your 45 plus years?
We've done a lot of interesting jobs at a lot of I want to say interesting places. Golf courses are some of my favorites. Um, Plus and minus, you're out. The weather's usually nice. It's a nice place to work. Sometimes if they're still playing golf, you have to be careful. But some of those we've done a lot of hydrofracturing for bigger wells, 8 inch, 10 inch wells, wells that are already producing 50, 60 gallons a minute. We've increased them to 100, 150 gallons a minute. Um, there's a lot of different things that you can do with the hydrofrac equipment. You can use the same pumps to use a jetting tool on the bottom of your pipe to clean screens, almost the same as the old as surging does to clean screens. You can do the same thing. We use the same pumps to do packer testing, permeability testing, rock stress test measurements. They all require packers, pumps. So we've done tunnel projects. I did a project with the Army Corps of Engineers for tunnel and cavity detection in the DMZ between North and South Korea. We worked at we did some work for the police college in Johannesburg in South Africa. I've been to Ghana 2 or 3 times, getting countries started. We sold a lot to governments, and the governments would hire us as a consultant also to train their crews. So I spent quite a bit of time traveling the world too. In the early years, up until probably the mid '90s, I did a lot of seminars on hydrofracturing. I know National Groundwater at the National Convention, I would say probably 3 times at least over the years. Um, and a lot of the state, lots and lots of state. Um, and the regional shows when the National Groundwater used to have the Pacific Northwest show and the Midwest show and the New England show. I gave talks at all of them. And I think we talked about it before, the Colorado School of Mines and
Oh yeah.
the World Conference on Water in Barcelona. I was invited to present a paper there. I did that. So um, Sir Sanford Fleming College, I taught there a few times for some of their classes.
And you said you've manufactured units in every continent except Antarctica. Did you ever
We
think
have
that
we have now running in every continent, but Antarctica. I don't think they're probably going to ever buy one, and I don't see a place for it in Antarctica.
oh my goodness. And then the alternative uses of hydrofracturing you just shared, but did you ever think that your career would be this expansive, like where it's gone?
No, I always enjoyed drilling. Drill rigs and drilling equipment, and from small test holes, 3 or 4 inch test holes, to 36-inch irrigation wells. And I've drilled everything in between. I've always enjoyed all types of drilling and all types of equipment. Hydrofracturing gave us a little bit more of a challenge. At that time, it was about the newest thing in the industry. Um, it's still There's still parts of the country. I think the Mid-Atlantic states are just now getting into doing as much hydrofracturing as New England has been for the
Hmm.
last years. Um, we're starting to sell a lot of equipment there. We sell a lot to Canada lately too. They're starting, I think, as more people are coming to Canada, there's more homes and need more wells.
Yeah.
Uh, so I know that the equipment has evolved so much now that it went from just a simple pump and motor combination to transmission. Then we started the hydraulic drives, which were, just a simple hydraulic pump, then a 2-speed pump. Now we're building them with a variable speed hydraulic pump with a 2-speed motor, using the same type of pump that you use for rotation circuit on a drill rig. So you can stroke the pump to get to the speed out of your motor. So we run a smaller engine. We can run a 75 horsepower diesel engine. And between the strokeable pump and the two-speed motor, you've got infinite control over speed and pressure. You don't have to change the RPM of the engine. Everything's run by actuators and toggle switches now. Very, very simple, easy to run, and much more efficient.
I appreciate you sharing the where the market is headed. Where the market is headed, mentioning the Mid-Atlantic, Canada. You can only drill so many new wells, and so there's a niche place for hydrofrac.
Right. Well, rehab is probably, I'd probably say 40%, 60% new well, 40% rehab of old wells. A lot of places now, when you drilled a well originally 40, 50 years ago, there was plenty of room. Now with all the setbacks, offsets, new neighbors, larger septic systems, now there's less places. Sometimes it's just you can't get a drill rig into the property to drill. So rehab of the existing well becomes important. We find that if we're far enough into the hydrofracking now that wells that were hydrofracked 30 years ago, 25 years ago, we're finding that you can go back and hydrofracture them again and bring them back to original yield again and continue using the same well. Our philosophy was always that hydrofracturing is not instead of drilling wells. Every well should be drilled with the intention that it's going to produce water naturally. If you are a driller and you know your area, you're in an area and you know all the wells are up to 500 feet deep and they all produce plenty of water, well, you don't want to drill a 300-foot well and then try and hydrofrack it and move on. You want to drill your well to 500 feet. You probably want to drill it to 600 feet. If you don't have water, then you hydrofrack. It's another tool to use in development after you've already exhausted what you can to drill well to make it produce like it would originally.
And let's wrap with you're still going strong manufacturing units today. How's that going on a day-to-day basis?
We're still I've scaled down. I'm getting older, like a lot of us in the industry. So I've scaled down. We don't build as many as we used to. It takes a little bit longer to build them. Supply chain issues, again, everybody knows that. We have problems getting parts, but we're still building units. We're still selling them. We still have the basic 2 units. We make a larger unit that incorporates everything into one piece, and then we make a smaller unit that has separate pieces. You can mount them different places. It goes in spurts like every other industry. Some years we're busy the entire year, and some years it's not quite as busy. But there's still repair parts to sell. We are still selling parts for rigs that we built 30 years ago. The pumps are still running, the engines are still running. So the longevity of the equipment is as good or better than drilling rigs. The equipment is less, the profit is more. Once you realize your investment in the capital equipment, you don't have to buy bits, you don't have to buy casing, you don't have pumps, you don't have wire, you don't have pipe. You have some water and a packer. That's it. So the profit margin in hydrofracturing is very large. It's a good addition to your industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim, thank you for your time and service for the industry over the years. It's much appreciated. We want to, for any viewers or listeners who want to learn more about Jim's company, visit starhydro.com. And to learn more about hydrofracturing, NGWA has a book by Stuart Smith titled An Introduction to Waterwell Hydrofracturing, and you can find that on our website, ngwa.org/bookstore. So hats off to your career, Jim, and many more years to come. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. It's nice to talk to you.
Thanks for watching and listening to the WWJ Industry Connected Podcast. We'll be back next month with a brand new episode, so be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all the major platforms, so it'll be easy to find us. And visit waterwelljournal.com for the latest expert columns, feature articles, videos, and news covering the groundwater industry. So one more time for Jim and I, Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.